The first American to use the temporary insanity plea was Daniel Sickles. What's his story? Well, Daniel Sickles was born in 1819 to a wealthy family, his father a lawyer and politician. He followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a lawyer and politician himself, being elected to the New York State Assembly in 1847. See, Sickles was part of Tammany Hall, a political ring that pretty much ran New York for nearly 180 years. If you got in with Tammany Hall, you were set, and Sickles was no exception. In 1853, he was sent to England to serve under James Buchanan. In 1856, he was elected to the New York State Senate, and in 1857, he was elected as a representative in the 35th U.S. Congress. So yeah, the man had a lot going for him. Now, back in 1852, Sickles had married Teresa Baggioli, who was 15 at the time, but supposedly very sophisticated. I guess this would be a good time to bring up the fact that Sickles was a bit of a ladies' man. I mean, look at him. You just know that guy was popular. But sometimes this tended to get him in trouble. He was censured by the state assembly for being escorted into the chamber by a well-known prostitute, pun intended, named Fanny White. And when he met Queen Victoria in London, who was on his arm? Was it his pregnant wife Teresa? Nope, it was Fanny. So he wasn't exactly the best husband. But when he received an anonymous letter around early 1859 claiming that his wife was having an affair with Philip Barton Key Jr., who was a district attorney of Washington, D.C. and the son of Francis Scott Key, you know, the national anthem guy, Sickles just had to investigate. What he learned was that the two rented a house in a, let's say, poorer part of town where they could have liaisons together. When he confronted Teresa, she denied everything. After all, this wasn't the first time he had accused her of cheating, even though he was rather well known for his dalliances. But eventually she confessed, and he had her write down and sign this confession. In February of 1859, Sickles saw Key sitting on a bench outside his house, signaling to Teresa. Sickles was rather angry, so he confronted Key, who left, then went inside the house, grabbed a gun, and shot the unarmed Key twice in Lafayette Square right across the street from the White House. One of those shots being aimed a little low, if you know what I mean. He then walked a few blocks to the Attorney General Jeremiah Black's house and turned himself in. Key was rushed to a nearby house and died. Sickles was then escorted to his house where he picked up a few things, including his wife's wedding ring, and was taken to jail. Though by jail, I mean the head jailer's apartment because, you know, he was a congressman with connections. When he was finally brought to trial, his legal team was the best that money could buy, including acclaimed Tammany attorney James Brady and future Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. They argued that he was not guilty by reason of temporary insanity, a plea that had never been used in the United States before. A quick aside on trials here. The insanity plea wasn't new. It had been used before, typically for the mentally handicapped, but had never been used in America. Also, the jury trial had been around since ancient times, but they were primarily for civil matters. When it came to criminal cases, more likely than not, the accused faced a trial by ordeal. And what probably comes to mind is witch trials and sinking or floating type of thing, but there were all types of trials by ordeals. Trial by fire, by water, by walking over red-hot irons. Hell, Madagascar had one that had to do with drinking poison and eating chicken skin. They were an important part of the justice system until 1215, and hopefully some of you know one of the reasons why. The first reason was that the church made clergy immune, taking God having anything to do with it out of the outcome, and the people began to turn against it. Also, the creation of the Magna Carta, which guaranteed a jury trial to anyone who wanted one. Trials by ordeal continued, used quite extensively in the Inquisition, and it eventually became primarily used in witch hunts. By the way, the reason you can't punish a jury for bringing back a verdict that the judge disagrees with is known as Bushell's case, where William Meade and William Penn, future founder of Pennsylvania and original Quaker Oats model, were found not guilty by a jury even though the judge had denied the defense their right to present a case. The judge then fined the jury and had them jailed until they paid. One of them, Edward Butchell fought this all the way to the Court of Common Pleas, who ruled that jurors could not be punished based on their verdict. Sorry, but judicial history is just kind of interesting. Moving on. Remember that confession that Teresa had written out and signed at her husband's behest? Well, Sickles and Pepperidge Farm remembered. But it wasn't admissible as evidence in court, however it was publishable in the press. And if you couple this with stories published of how Sickles had saved many marriages when he got rid of that dastardly seducer Key, the public quickly turned in Sickles' favor. Also keep in mind that Sickles actually had a jury of his peers, a jury of peers that would probably do the same thing in Sickles' position. So, with the defense arguing that he had been driven insane and acted out in a crime of passion, he was found not guilty. And of course, the verdict was celebrated. He would eventually reconcile with his wife, greatly hurting his political career as people saw him as weak, but he went on to fight in the Civil War, culminating in the Battle of Gettysburg, where he was wounded by a cannonball, losing his right leg below the knee. A leg that's now on display in the National Museum of Health and Medicine in Spring, Maryland if you ever want to see it in person. Sickles ended up dying in 1914 at 94 years old, probably of old age. Oh, and when Fanny White found out Sickles had married 15-year-old Teresa, she beat him with a riding whip. Just thought I'd add that.